The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to December's Glasgow section meeting of PWI. Welcome to another online webinar. And I'll just remind you of the domestic arrangements. Hopefully you can see on the screen our agenda for the evening. And as a reminder, the meeting will be recorded, not at the moment, but it will be when it starts properly. Cameras are off. You, the audience, will be muted during the presentation only. So please raise any questions or make comments via the questions pop-up on the GoToWebinar dashboard. So that 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one down on my screen, it says questions. You click that one open, you can type a question to the presenter in there. And I'll discuss these and just take them in turn after the main presentation. Section news and apologies. Any news, Jim, apart from your success today?
No news. Tom, apologies-wise, John Oates and Greg McMillan have intimated that they're unable to join us this evening.
Okay. Jim's success today was another candidate review for PWI. There'll be no change to our section meetings going forward into 2021, as they are at the moment, third Wednesday of every month at 5:30 kickoff. These will continue as webinars until current restrictions, whatever they are lifted. And when we do get back to face-to-face meetings, we'll hold these again in our WSP's Queen Street conference room. They'll be recorded as webinars as well as doing face-to-face for those that want to turn up in person and have a real beer instead of a virtual beer. Okay, tonight's paper is entitled A Strategic View of Scotland's Railway, and it's going to be delivered by Alex Hines, who's the Managing Director of Scotland's Railway. In the usual manner, a little bit about Alex first of all. Alex has been Managing Director for Scotland's Railway since June 2019, and he's an experienced transport professional with over 20 years of industry experience and a proven track record in delivering rail improvement and investment programmes. He spent his early career as a consultant with Halcro Fox and worked with the Office of Rail Regulation before joining the Go-Ahead Group in 2005 as a strategic planning manager. By 2007, he was Commercial Director at London Midland and then Managing Director for Rail Development. Before joining the ScotRail Alliance in 2017, Alex was Managing Director of the Northern Rail franchise for 3.5 years, where he successfully delivered their best ever customer satisfaction scores, as well as record levels of employee engagement. Following recent further operational devolution to Scotland, Alex was appointed to the broader role of Managing Director, Scotland's Railway, where he leads the delivery of Scotland's Railway through the ScotRail Alliance, a unique and industry-leading partnership between Abellio ScotRail and Edinburgh Rail Scotland. Alex is a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. He's a Fellow of the PWI and a member of the Institution of Railway Operators and sits on the Scotland Advisory Board at Business in the Community. Alex's paper tonight, as I mentioned, is a strategic view of Scotland's Railway. And I'll just click onto the slideshow and I'll just change the presenter to Alex and you can take the slideshow from there. Over to you, Alex.
So, good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me and you can see the title slide, if someone could confirm that.
I can.
Perfect. So, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I recently joined the PWI Glasgow section as a fellow, so thank you for letting me in. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you this evening, and thank you for turning up. And I put together a few slides which explain what we're up to in the rail industry in Scotland right now. They're quite broad and wide ranging, and I'm not here to talk about gauging or track geometry, because frankly I'd be the wrong person to do that. And hopefully I will whiz through my slides relatively quickly to leave plenty of time for questions on anything I've discussed, or indeed anything that I haven't. So hopefully you can all see the Stonehaven slide. I couldn't talk to you this evening about the railway in Scotland without mentioning the absolutely tragic events which happened on the 12th of August of this year, which was, for me anyway, the worst day of my professional career, and I'm sure a lot of other people as well. And our hearts remain with Brett, Donald and Christopher, who were the 3 victims of this terrible accident, 2 of whom of course were our colleagues, the driver and the guard. There was a washout following severe rainfall, the train derailed, hit a bridge parapet, and we need to make sure it never happens again. We are already operating the railway in a different way. You will see more precautionary speed restrictions to at least reduce the consequence of something like that happening again. And meanwhile, Network Rail, whose of course responsibility is to maintain the infrastructure and avoid similar washouts in the future, has commissioned 2 task forces from world experts, one in earthworks management and one in weather forecasting. And both of those task forces will report around the turn of the year, and Network Rail needs to make sure that no stone is unturned to reduce the chances of that happening again. Clearly, there's a live investigation. It would be inappropriate for me to talk in detail about how that is going, but I wanted to confront this issue head on, and particularly at this time of year, I think it's important to remember that 3 people lost their lives, and we need to do everything that we can to make sure that families don't experience that ever again. So the structure of my paper is sort of split down into before, during and after coronavirus, because of course had Carmont not happened, the thing which would have dominated the rail industry this year in Scotland and indeed south of the border was the management of coronavirus. And prior to the 23rd of March, which was the day we were locked down, we were busy building the best railway Scotland's ever had. And people say to me, what on earth does that mean, building the best railway Scotland's ever had? And I always say, customers should judge whether we're building the best railway Scotland's ever had. And I'll come on to customer satisfaction soon. And here's a wonderful picture of one of our high-speed trains travelling through Perthshire. And one of the key elements of Abellio's bid for the ScotRail franchise was an investment of £475 million in new and upgraded trains, the vast majority of which have now arrived. And I'll talk about electrification and the deployment of the 385s a bit later. But hopefully next year we will welcome you back onto the train, and you'll realise that we have recreated a genuine intercity network for Scotland to provide levels of speed, frequency and comfort which you cannot provide with the trains that the HSTs replaced. And it's a good example of us building back better, which is just as well, because in our post-pandemic world, one of the rail industry's key competitors will be Microsoft Teams and GoToWebinar and Zoom and all of these people. And unless the customer experience is brilliant, people won't use it. And therefore, it's vital that next year we're delivering an even better customer experience than we were this time last year, and we will. So I'm conscious that not everybody will be from the Glasgow section of the PWI and may not live north of the border, but I thought, you know, it was worthwhile just touching on some of the features of Scotland's railway. So there are 5 million people who live in Scotland. That's about the population of Yorkshire, and yet the country is a third of Britain's landmass, and most of the population, and hence the railway activity, is towards the south of the country, but particularly concentrated around the central belt. There are 7 cities in Scotland and we connect them all, and ScotRail is one of the largest train operating companies in Britain, and Network Rail is chopped up into 5 nations and regions, and one of them is Scotland. And here in Scotland we have a very high degree of overlap between Network Rail's infrastructure and the operations of the primary train operator, ScotRail, and therefore we are in an alliance with each other, and we have a single MD who attempts to run the railway system in Scotland at least. And we believe that the way you run a railway most effectively is by doing it track and train, working in harmony, and the Scottish Government certainly believes that, and indeed tries to make that happen. The rail industry in Scotland employs 12,500 people and generates lots of economic benefits, not just moving passengers around and freight reliably. And Scotland's railway is a huge success story. We have seen massive volume growth over many years, which was frankly a nice problem to have prior to the 23rd of March. And therefore, we had an ambitious agenda for investing in the railway. In a typical year, Scottish Government funds ScotRail, Scottish Government funds Network Rail Scotland for the operations, maintenance and renewal of the network, but they also spend about £200 million a year on enhancements. And so these are some of the projects which are in development. Growing Lothian and the Borders, which is down to the borders obviously, and looking at the east end of Edinburgh Waverly and some critical infrastructure there, Portobello Junction being a good example. 7 cities connectivity, how can we improve the rail links between the 7 cities, particularly with respect to journey time? I have an aspiration to deliver rail journeys at a mile a minute. We've delivered that already on Edinburgh Glasgow, 42 miles, 42 minutes. And if we're going to maximise the ability of the railway to contribute to Scotland's prosperity, we need to cut journey times, and you know, a mile a minute seems a good place to start. South East to England connectivity, that's the East Coast Main Line, the north bit of it. Edinburgh Waverly, obviously a very congested bit of railway. Lots of aspirations to operate more services into Edinburgh Waverly, but it's full, particularly from the Fife direction, and therefore, you know, we've got some exciting plans around Edinburgh Waverly western approaches. East Kilbride and Barrhead, you know, take East Kilbride, one of the busiest commuter flows from a suburb of Glasgow into Glasgow, and we're operating class 156 diesel trains. Not very 2020, is it? So how can we modernise that? How can we improve the service on the far north line, recognising challenges on that bit of the network, particularly the existence of lots of single track. It's very difficult to deliver a world-class railway on a network which has so much single track. Of course, the railway in Scotland doesn't just exist for passengers, it exists for freight as well. And in order to improve modal shift from HGVs to rail freight trains, we need to invest in enhancing the gauge that we have here in Scotland so we can carry more freight. And I think in our post-pandemic railway, freight will become a bigger part of the mix. The specification and the funding of Scotland's railways devolved to Scottish Government. So Scottish Government has a business plan which sets out 5 objectives about creating a greener, wealthier, fairer, higher skilled, safer Scotland, etc. Scottish Government has a transport agency called Transport Scotland, and Transport Scotland specifies and funds Network Rail in Scotland, and it specifies and funds ScotRail. And Scottish Government through Transport Scotland try to make sure that what ScotRail is asked to deliver is consistent with what Network Rail is asked to deliver. And the best example of this is on train service performance, where both ScotRail and Network Rail have the identical performance target of 92.5 ppm, that's time to 5, measured on a moving annual average. And Network Rail and ScotRail work together to deliver that performance target. And if you sit in one of our performance meetings in Scotland with ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland people round the table, you cannot tell who works for who. It's one team Scotland. And Scottish ministers every 5 years have to write a document called the High Level Output Specification, which basically directs Network Rail to deliver certain things, and that's available on their website, and basically explains what needs to be delivered on the Network Rail side of the house. And then on the ScotRail side of the house, they enshrine that franchise agreement, which is also available on the public register. So Scottish ministers, by and large, specify and fund the railway from Holyrood, which has got to be a good thing, because devolved railways tend to be better than non-devolved railways in my experience. I talked about customer satisfaction. We measure customer satisfaction through the National Rail Passenger Survey. In the latest wave, we were at 90% satisfaction, which is the highest it's ever been in Scotland. It has touched 90 before, and we're really looking forward to the National Rail Passenger Survey starting again once COVID passes, because we've delivered even more high-speed trains. We've done Glasgow Queen Street Station. The reliability is much better, and I'm looking forward to delivering a customer satisfaction score in excess of 90. And therefore we can say, yeah, we set out to build the best railway Scotland's ever had. And guess what? We just did. One of the ways we have improved both customer satisfaction and performance and our green credentials has been through electrification. Now, of course, Scotland has had a proud record of electrification over a number of years, and we had a little bit of a blip with Edinburgh Glasgow electrification, which did not go very well. But electrification schemes prior to that and since then have gone well. And what this means is that 75% of passenger journeys on ScotRail are already made on electric services, and freight, I think, is about 45% electrified. And we've delivered recent electrification schemes on time and on budget. We've done a piece of work with Scottish Government called an efficient electrification specification for Scotland to identify what opportunities we have to deliver electrification more smartly in the future. And you know, even though we're delivering these projects on time and on budget these days, we are regarded by our client and funder, Transport Scotland, to be reassuringly expensive. And there is a desire to do a lot more electrification. And so what can we do to drive the cost down, get really, really good at it, and then we can crack on with decarbonising our railway, more of which later. And the reason why we put the wires up is so we can operate modern electric trains. And prior to COVID, I used to commute every day between Glasgow and Edinburgh. The electrification of that line and the introduction of trains have changed my life and have changed the lives of millions of people. They've added a lot more capacity. Modern electric trains are mega reliable with very, comparatively little maintenance, which is good for availability, and it's good cost, and it's great for customers because we short form less. These trains are boringly reliable, which is how trains should be. And they're so reliable, they're the most reliable new train in Britain. And we're absolutely proud of the way Hitachi, Transport Scotland, ScotRail and Network Rail in Scotland have worked together to make that introduction a success. We top the new train reliability league table, and readers of Modern Railways will recognise this table with Roger Ford, the sort of league table of new trains, and this train is so reliable he's about to kick us out of that table because we can't be regarded as a new train when we're delivering 50,000 miles per casualty. And I've said to Hitachi, I want this train at 100,000 miles per casualty because that's what I got from Siemens when we were operating modern electric trains in the West Midlands. It can be done, it will be done, and we'll deliver an even better service for our customers. Fabulous trains. I talked about intercity. So 475 million on new and upgraded trains by Ablio through the new franchise. The vast majority of that was the 385 fleet, but we also procured 26 high-speed trains as well. And tragically, we lost one at Carmont, so the total fleet size is 25, and we now have 24 in Scotland, which is brilliant. Now, obviously, we're not running a full timetable at the moment. We only have 13 HSTs in traffic every day, but I've recently moved to Highland Perthshire, and on my trips down south, I'm getting into 7 city trains every time I travel, and by God, what a fantastic experience compared to what was there before. We're replacing 3-car diesel trains with 4-car intercity trains, but 17 of the trains in the order are being lengthened to 5-carriage trains, and they've been wonderfully refurbished. For Scotland, we've taken seats out, we've lined seats up with windows, we've created loads of space for luggage. They're brilliant trains, iconic trains, and the ScotRail engineering team are doing a brilliant job of engineering them. And these trains are more reliable than the Great Western HSTs, and they've had 40 years to get good at maintaining them. Not that I'm competitive or anything. And we are building a HST stabling facility at Cadder, to the east of Glasgow, and we just started driver training this week because we need more spaces to park a fleet which is now 25% bigger than it was at the start of the franchise, which is great news for everybody. Just to make some of you feel old, these trains were introduced 10 years ago, and so we're giving them a makeover. Again, fabulous modern trains, transforming the network, did do 10 years ago, and delivering boringly reliable levels of punctuality for customers in Ayrshire and Inverclyde. And we're taking the best bits of the 385s and retrofitting them to the 380s. So, for example, the way we sign our priority seats, which is brilliant, which we tried on the 385, we're retrofitting that into the 380s as part of their interior facelift. Not to forget the sleeper, of course, Journey of a Night Time. For those of you who have not been on the brand new sleeper, they are brilliant trains. The fact that you can have ensuite shower is a complete game changer, and you know, I think this is another great example of Scotland's Railway leading the way because with the decarbonisation agenda, it's likely that in the future people are going to have to fly less and take sleeper trains more often. And as a country, we've invested in a brand new fleet of sleeper trains, again designed for Scotland. So if you haven't been on one of these new trains yet, please make it your New Year's resolution, because they're great. And the other thing, of course, is freight. So we have a plan to grow rail freight in Scotland by 7.5% between 2019 and 2024. That is the control period 6 time horizon. And we're making really good progress on that. And even during lockdown, 3 new freight flows had started in Scotland. We had a new service between Aberdeen and Spalding. We had a new timber freight flow trial, an unusual one, in fact, because that runs wholly within Scotland on the far north line, stops at Inverness, whereas, of course, most freight flows in Scotland are cross-border. I think one of our most exciting freight projects we're working on at the moment is about 18 months ago, we created a new rail connection off the Highland Main Line at Blackford near Gleneagles for the Highland Spring factory and Highland Spring the mineral water. And Highland Spring are just about to finish the construction of their freight facility, which will use the connection onto the railway, and that will enable Highland Spring to move its product by rail. And each freight train takes 76 HGVs off the roads, which is fantastic if you happen to ever use the A9. And it's also fantastic as part of decarbonisation as well, because the private motor car industry has worked out how to decarbonise cars. It's easy, you just make them electric, and battery technology is improving rapidly. But no one's really worked out how to decarbonise HGVs. And growing numbers of companies are looking to rail freight to be the answer to their decarbonisation prayers. And that's not to forget cross-border as well. Very important. Also investing in new trains, more services, faster journeys, more seats, etc. You know, what is not to like? And then clearly on the 23rd of March, I remember that day vividly because it's my birthday, and we didn't go out for dinner. We watched the Prime Minister on telly telling us to stay inside, and so we did. And clearly this gave us very great challenges as a railway. And I think our people have done an amazing job during coronavirus, and I pay tribute to all the men and women of Scotland's railway on the front line who have kept this railway running for those that needed it, essential workers, and for freight reliably throughout the pandemic. And I just think they've done an amazing job, whilst lots of other people, particularly a lot of the attendees on this call, will have been working from their dining room table or kitchen table or whatever. You know, at the height of the pandemic, when really things look quite grim, they did an amazing job of delivering a vital public service, which is what they do every day. And there's one of our HSTs wearing a face mask. So we talked about the alignment between ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland and Transport Scotland, and what we did very quickly as coronavirus started to take hold was establish what's called a Rail Recovery Task Force. And that was Transport Scotland, ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland working together to navigate our way through the COVID challenges. And since that time in March, I've chaired a twice weekly call of the senior people in those three organisations to make sure we manage and step through all these opportunities and challenges in a joined up way. And it's pleasing to see that Scottish Government think that we've done a great job, which is good, because it's always important to keep your customer happy. And clearly the first thing we had to do is make sure that we had the production of the railway in a COVID secure way. So whether that was driving a train, maintaining a train, cleaning a train, signalling a train, maintaining a bit of track, renewing a bit of track, head offices, you name it, it all had to be made COVID secure. And again, I think people did an amazing job of re-engineering the production of the railway to make it COVID secure. And then of course we also had to make sure that the customer bits of our business were all also made COVID secure as well, albeit that was slightly less urgent because after the 23rd of March there weren't actually very many people travelling at all, and I'll show you some stats on that shortly. So all the way through the pandemic, we have followed the public health guidance. We have worked in lockstep with the Scottish Government advice, and that has served us well. I think probably messages are being clearer here, a bit more consistent. We haven't been sort of easing off too easily and then having to clamp back down again. You know, from my perspective, it seems to have been well managed. And some people have said, you know, surely as a railway manager, you shouldn't be telling people not to travel. You know, surely you should be sending every household, you know, free tickets to use the network whilst it's quiet. Well, we are seeing now how virulent this thing is, and we're now staring down the barrel of a third wave. So I don't think we can do much other than do what we're doing, do it really well until the vaccination programme is well advanced enough for us to get the final green light from the public health authorities. And in particular, the thing which affects us more than else is the requirement for physical distancing. And until the requirement for physical distancing is dropped, it will be very difficult to make rail relevant again. But we will, and we'll do it next year. We just don't know when yet. During the height of the pandemic, passenger numbers were way down. I'll show you some data in a minute. Far few passenger services were operating, which actually meant there was a lot more space on the network for freight trains, and in particular, longer freight trains. So we run the daily train up to Inverness, the DRS Tesco train, and these trains were running around with more boxes on than they'd ever run before. And actually, Network Rail had done a great job of accommodating those additional requirements. In the ScotRail franchise agreement, there's a clause which allows Transport Scotland and ScotRail to move passenger trains slightly to create space for freight trains. And again, this is a good example of us working well together as a system to do what's required and harness the vital role of rail freight. Teamwork makes the dream work. You know, not only were ScotRail, Network Rail and Transport Scotland working in harmony, but of course, you know, those people in our health and social care system are the real heroes of this crisis, and we wanted to pay tribute to them. And as the steward of some of the most iconic structures in Scotland, we lit it blue to honour those people who work in health and social care. We did light blue the Glenfinnan Viaduct a few times. Obviously it got more difficult as the pandemic went on because the nights got lighter and our camera crews increasingly got eaten alive, literally, by the midges up on the West Highland line. Passenger numbers collapsed, the costs of the railway are largely fixed, so government north and south of the border stepped in to secure rail services and the employment of people who work in the rail sector through these things called the Emergency Measures Agreement. And essentially, the shortfall in revenue is being paid for by the taxpayer, and that has enabled train services to run, despite the fact that income was way down and costs were fixed. And essentially, I think these emergency measure agreements have been fantastic. Scottish Government have been very supportive, and the byproduct of that, of course, is it has accelerated the end of franchising, and at some point next year we might find out what comes next if UK Government publishes the white paper into the future structure of the railway. But all the costs and the revenue risk of ScotRail flows directly back to the taxpayer, which is good, because we need the flexibility to respond with the train service in accordance with the public health advice. Partnership has characterised our approach, and I've talked about the partnership between ScotRail, Network Rail and Transport Scotland. We call it Team Scotland, but also we've worked in partnership with our trade unions as well. And we've created a subgroup of the task force called the Partnership Working Group, and the 4 trade unions are part of that in the tent at the heart of our decision-making process, helping us to navigate through the pandemic, and it's worked really well. And definitely a legacy we will build on as we come into our post-pandemic world. An involved trade union is a more cooperative trade union. Communications has been a key area of activity both internally and externally, and the ScotRail communications team developed these 5 rules of safer travel, which we think are really good. They're easy to understand. We've never changed them. They're up all across the network. There's really no excuse for not knowing how to use the network safely to keep yourself or the customers and colleagues safe. And I think our communications has been strong, and obviously we've not been running very many trains, and we've not been accommodating very many passengers, but actually all our measurement of media sentiment, reputation and all that good stuff that big companies measure has never been better. And that's really important, because people remember how brands behave during times like this when the chips are down. We want those customers that we're used to carry to come back to our railway and think, yeah, those folks at ScotRail are nice people. We want to travel with them and give our money to them. Clearly, the front line comes first, and our essential workers on the front line of train service provision, as I've said before, I just think have done an amazing job. We've spent a lot of time making sure they have had the tools to do the job so they can be the very best that they can be. We've cut through red tape. We've got much better at talking to our front line, involving them in the business, etc., etc. And again, that is something we need to keep. Some lessons learned. Even trains can cover their face. Staff should be your #1 priority. You can't physically distance in a train cab, which has undermined driver training since March across Britain, and we've had to create driver training bubbles, a bit like Strictly, to train drivers in pandemic situations. Clearly, home working can work. Look at us now. Not as enjoyable, is it? But it does work. And the Confederation of British Industry is expecting most employees to divide their time evenly between home and the office in the future. commuting is now a discretionary activity. And we might never get the peak volumes back that we used to accommodate. Certainly, I'm not going to go back to doing what I did. I will definitely split my time between the office and the home, and I think millions of other people will do the same as well. And the railway needs to adapt and change to these new trends if it's going to remain relevant, but also remain affordable. The power of social media, obviously, Scotland social media plays a very big role. We've got a great social media presence. Our social media team are amazing. They run the accounts for ScotRail and Network Rail in Scotland, and they start at 5:30 in the morning and they finish at midnight. So pretty much when we've got trains running, we've got our helpful, friendly team looking after our customers as well. Clearly, we need to think about the future and how we emerge from this post-pandemic world, and we're doing lots of scenario planning around.
Are you still with us, Alex?
Whatever structure comes next. Clearly, cleanliness has been a key part of everything we've done. So all our hospitality staff got redirected into cleaning. We've been doing loads of cleaning, and there haven't been any instances where a member of a passenger has contracted COVID-19 on board a rail service. The trains are safe, but actually the advice is don't travel and mingle too much, not because there's a specific train factor, but because mingling is not good for this virus, because it's human beings that carry it. Clearly, timetable changes. Normally we operate May and December, 2 big timetable changes every year. They're always very stressful. We've had to change our timetable many times this year. We've done it much more with agility than normal, and I think we're all thinking actually changing the timetable more frequently in smaller chunks is probably a good thing to do, and going back to 2 big timetable changes a year probably isn't sensible. It's no easy task, but again, this is an example where I think there's going to be a coronavirus legacy to do things differently in the future, and of course customers adapt quickly. So the First Minister can announce something on one day, and on the next day we see it in our revenue numbers. It is incredible. And so on Friday, when the tier restrictions changed in Glasgow, we lengthened trains in the central belt in anticipation of greater demand, and we saw it straight away in the revenue numbers. The minute Glasgow changed tiers, people started taking the train again. So where do we go next? Well, clearly we need to make sure we don't put back the old railway back, because the world's changed. Coronavirus has accelerated lots of trends that were already there: home working, internet shopping, death of the high street, all these trends that were already happening. Coronavirus has accelerated, so we've got to build back better, not put back what was there before, because the world's moved on. Clearly, train service performance has improved a lot during the pandemic across GB, because we've got fewer passengers and fewer trains. What this graph shows is the performance of ScotRail, and the blue line shows PPM, so that's the public performance measure, time to 5, so that's measured at destination. Did it arrive within 4 minutes 59 of its book time? And what this shows is prior to the pandemic, train service performance was improving really well, which is great. And we have we reduced the timetable in March down to about 40% of normal, and train series performance continued to increase. And everyone said, well, of course, it's easy running a railway, isn't it, with so few passengers and so few trains. But we've been doing some brilliant work on the ScotRail fleet, the Network Rail infrastructure, around seasonal preparedness, but also building back better timetables. And even though on the 3rd of August we were operating 92% of the service, we've recently pared it back a bit to about 80%. Performance continues to rise very strongly. We are not far away of hitting our target of 92.5. We should hit that around about the springtime. And then the most important thing is that these are sustainable changes, so that as the number of passengers return to the railway, we maintain those high level performance, which is so important because the competitor is now Microsoft Teams, and if the product is not good, people will stay at home because they can. This is a graph which just shows, you know, we're doing a lot of analytical work. You know, in the past it was that train's arrived late. Why is it arrived late? Oh, you know, on a busy network like ours, we've been looking at the complex interactions between trains and trying to identify what is the train which creates the trigger, which delays all the other trains, which allow them to go late. And particularly around our autumn timetable, what we found is making a very small number of pretty minor adjustments can have an enormous impact on punctuality if you look at it as a system. And our ability to do that between Network Rail and ScotRail is arguably stronger than it is in other bits of the network, because we work more closely together than other bits of the network. Revenue, this shows the revenue shortfall compared to the same period last year. So we measure revenue daily, and obviously we've got weeks within the rail industry periods. And what that shows on the left-hand side is that at the height of lockdown, our revenue was 93% lower than the same week in the previous year. Unbelievable. We were asked to stay at home, and guess what? We did. And as restrictions began to ease as we came out of lockdown 1, you can see passenger numbers started to return quite nicely, and we regained 25% of that market in the summer period. We were 70% down. Leisure grew faster than commuting and business. Saturday became ScotRail's busiest day, unlike Mondays and Fridays, which it had been previously. But obviously, as the restrictions tightened, we lost a lot of the traffic that we regained. And, you know, frankly, until the public health crisis is over, we will carry on watching this graph go up and down. It directly correlates with whatever the public health restrictions are in force at the time. There's not a great deal the rail industry can do about it. I've talked about communication, and here are some examples. If you don't already follow ScotRail or Network Rail Scotland on Twitter, then you should, because they're brilliant at it. We've all had enough of coronavirus, haven't we? But when this public health crisis is over, we've got another crisis waiting to be tackled, and that's the climate change crisis. And the railway had identified climate change as a risk. It's one reason why Network Rail have got 22% more money to spend on operations, maintenance and renewal in Scotland over this 5-year period. And we have our climate change adaptation plans in flight already. And every weekend, lots of work happening across the network, whether that's scour protection or new flood alleviation schemes. There is serious money going into the network to try and make it more resilient to the weather that we are now seeing, because the railway, the weather is now different from when the railways were built. And, you know, you only have to read the newspapers. You know, every month is the hottest, the wettest, the driest, the coldest, the windiest, the stormiest. You know, we used to be a temperate climate. We're not anymore. It's changed. We need to change our railway accordingly. And then, of course, on the 12th of August, we were the terrible victims of climate change. And we also need to decarbonise our operations. So the UK, I think, was the first major economy in the world to put net zero into law. So UK has to be net zero by 2050. In Scotland, of course, we're going to do it earlier because that's what we do. And we're going to be net zero by 2045. And we're going to decarbonise Scotland's railway by 2035. And so after we've navigated coronavirus, after we've, you know, worked bloody hard to win back our passengers, what will dominate the medium and long-term agenda is actually the decarbonisation of the railway in Scotland. We're going to remove all the diesel trains by 2035, which is no mean feat. So in July, I think it was, Mr. Matheson and I went to Shields Depot and we launched the Transport Scotland Decarbonisation Action Plan, which sets out how we're going to decarbonise the railway. And again, if you haven't already looked at that document, I recommend that you do. And we're very busy at the moment working with Transport Scotland to make sure we can work out what lines we're going to electrify and when, how that works with rolling stock decisions, how we're going to pay for it, make sure we get the money, and then deliver a 15-year rolling programme of electrification for Scotland, which will be excellent. We're working on some other stuff as well. Edinburgh Waverly Master Plan. Edinburgh Waverly, very difficult station at the best of times. It was pretty full and busy prior to coronavirus. Needs a rethink. Obviously, it's not just a station. It's part of the fabric of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We've done a really good piece of work on master plan, and people said to me, "You'll never do that. You'll never do that. They'll want your heads in the stocks in Edinburgh because you can't touch anything in Edinburgh." Well, if you bring the heritage people into the heart of your planning, guess what? You can have sensible conversations with people. So an involved heritage lobby is a cooperative heritage lobby, and Mr. Matheson is very keen on our plans for Edinburgh Waverly, and I'd encourage you to have a look at the master plan ideas which we published in the summer. We're having a bit of fun as well. The Forth Bridge experience. We're building a visitors bridge climb experience on the south side initially. There's a plan, a longer term plan on the north side for a visitors centre. We're going to do the south side first, test the concept. I've got no doubt this will turn into one of the world's most favourite tourism activities. I've been lucky enough to go up onto the bridge, and it really is quite a moving experience, if I'm honest. We want to share it with the world, and some of you may have done the Sydney Bridge climb. I have. This is going to be better. I talked earlier about, even though we're delivering these projects in Scotland, like Electrification and Kintore and Queen Street Station and, you know, Leavenmouth and new stations at East Linton and Reston, and with Aberdeen to Inverness, and we're delivering them on time and on budget, or early and under budget, we are still regarded as reassuringly expensive by the client and funder, Transport Scotland, and therefore we've got to create an efficient and competitive railway. We need to, you know, halve the time and slash the cost of delivering these enhancements, because, you know, we're in a competition for public resources. And if rail is very expensive, politicians might decide to invest in other things and in other modes, and that would be terrible. So no one owes us a living. We've got to continually improve our performance, but also our efficiency and our competitiveness, whether that's our competitiveness to attract public funds, or our competitiveness against the motor car in terms of a mile a minute, or our competitiveness in terms of rail freight versus HGVs. We need to remember we live in a competitive world and not a static one, and we can't stand still. We've got to get better every day. So for me, the number one priority for the railway right now is, when the time is right, making sure we win back our passengers and indeed get more freight onto our railway, because we desperately need the money. And in the medium and long term, the thing which will dominate our agenda is the decarbonisation of the railway in Scotland, where we've got some bold, ambitious and exciting plans. And the management team in ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland is really up for this challenge, and we can't wait to start delivering it. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Alex. I'll just pinch back the screen and I'll take any question. I'll run through the questions that have been asked on the questions box, and we have one from Tricia Fort. And her question is, whose decarbonisation agenda is it? And she asked that because, as she observes, the Scottish Government's advice throughout COVID-19 crisis has been to avoid public transport and use the car.
Yeah, so at the moment, public health trumps everything, yeah? And I think, with the benefit of hindsight, I think the government message should have been, don't travel around rather than don't use public transport, because, and actually they subsequently came out and said car share with the household, for example, because risk factors are prevalent there as well. And Scottish Government and UK Government did such a brilliant job, telling people to stay home and avoid public transport. People complied with it, and I think everyone was surprised by the levels of compliance. And yeah, with the glorious benefit of hindsight, perhaps that message demonised public transport a bit more than the science bears out. I think most people get coronavirus in supermarkets, I think. So that's not great, is it? But it is where we are, and we've never seen coronavirus before. There's no textbook for it, and this is where we are. We're just got to deal with it. So the decarbonisation agenda is, set by the politicians. So, UK government 2050 net zero, it's in law. Scottish government 2045 net zero, it's in law. And in fact, Scottish government is compelled to produce an annual climate change adaptation plan, and those plans have to be consistent with the achievement of the objective, which is net zero 2045. And just today, in fact, Scottish Government had published their update on the climate change adaptation, and it reiterates the commitment around decarbonising the railway in Scotland by 2035. And that's a good example of whereby legally we don't need to decarbonise the railway in Scotland until 2045, but actually Scottish Government wants it done by 2035, because the quicker we decarbonise, the quicker we start saving the planet, recognising that there are literally parts of our planet which are on fire or sinking beneath water.
Thanks for that. Trish. Another question from Russell Kimber this time. He says, hi Alex, with passenger numbers currently exceptionally low and parcel delivery levels perceived to be at an all-time high, are there any thoughts of using some passenger trains as multifunctional services, additionally carrying parcels and people, even in the short term, to gain some supplementary income into rail until the recovery begins in earnest?
Yeah, it's a great idea. During the pandemic, when early on, when there was PPE shortages, we were actually putting PPE on trains at Glasgow and taking them up to the north of Scotland, as a favour. I talked about the fact that rail freight is finding it easier to pack its trains at the moment because there are less passenger services running. Parcels, definitely something we have sort of explored tentatively pre-coronavirus, and it was always, have we got the space? What about security, etc., etc. I think that in a post-pandemic world where we're not carrying as many passengers as we used to, but we've got plenty of capacity, then we are going to have to explore new markets. And one of those potential new markets is high value parcels business. So we don't have any firm plans. No one really knows what's going to happen next year. But yes, that is the sort of thing we are going to have to explore, because our revenue is going to be way down for many years to come. And if we don't get it back quickly, painful decisions will have to be made.
Thank you. I think that the question was well made there, because I, for one, when I look out my bedroom window, office window these days, and look at the number of people that are delivering parcels, just the surrounding households, it's a market, and people are prepared to pay the premium to get that next day delivery.
Yeah, this Christmas versus last Christmas, there's 200 million extra items, something like that. And I hated internet shopping prior to lockdown. I've had to use it, and I think, crikey, this is amazing. You can order something, one evening, and it's there the next lunchtime. It's incredible.
And I think that's that high-speed freight. There's a whole agenda item to do with high-speed freight, which we can maybe cover at another forum. Question from Chris Haggerty now. With the paying passenger levels at risk, certainly getting them up to the quantum that we had pre-pandemic, is there an emerging strategy to enable freighter than the 7.5% previously mentioned? Is this a safe investment strategy or a safer investment strategy?
So yes, there is. I mean, obviously, the first thing we've got to do is deliver the 7.5% growth. And as I said, we've got some fantastic projects about to come on stream, like Highland Spring. But for example, I've got a conversation with a company called Norboard, who are a wood product manufacturer, and they have a factory up near Inverness, and they want to move their product by rail, but they don't fit onto the graph currently. And so we're having conversations with Transport Scotland, ScotRail, and Noah Rail, and Norboard, and the rail freight operator, which is, given the fact that passengers aren't travelling at the moment, and given that revenue is well down and volumes will take some time to recover, we're only carrying 15% of normal volumes at the moment. Shall we tweak the passenger trains to fit the freight in? So that is a live discussion. I've got one on Friday, and there are pros and cons, and we'll do the right thing for Scotland.
Thank you. I've unmuted the mics. If anybody would like to unmute their mic and ask a question, please feel free to do so. And while you're having a think about that, I'll ask a question about the decarbonisation, Alex. We talk about the decarbonisation agenda, and it's always, we look at the haulage, we look at the diesel trains. I think decarbonisation begins from a track engineer's perspective anyway, at the grassroots level. and we need to consider decarbonising our track renewal policy. Is that something that the Scottish Government are aware of, to look at track forms in the future and think what's the most carbon friendly or embodied carbon reduced type of track form?
So I think we are in the foothills of that. You know, what is the true carbon cost of our activity? So, you know, we now have a sustainability board for Scotland's Railway, which I chair, which is Transport Scotland, ScotRail Network around Scotland working together. We've got exciting plans. Clearly, one of the debates you end up having around decarbonisation is, yeah, but how are you measuring this? What exactly are you decarbonising? You know, one of the most carbonising activity is making concrete, isn't it? So I think we're in the foothills of this, if I'm perfectly honest. The priority is to decarbonise the traction of passenger day trains in Scotland by 2035. But clearly we've got to decarbonise everything else. We've got to decarbonise the boilers in the depots. We're doing loads of great work around regenerative braking, LED lighting in ScotRail. We've got solar powered generators in Network Rail, which apparently do work in Scotland. So there's lots of activity going on in this area. And in fact, one of the things we're doing in the new year is training some of our senior managers on, you know, what is this sustainability thing? What is decarbonisation? How do you measure it? How do you lead an organisation on a decarbonisation journey? Because we've never done this before. So I think we're all learning is the honest answer to that question.
Exactly. A question from John McGreevy. He says, one thing I've been talking about over the past several months is that businesses are starting to ask the question, do we really need 20 plus people in an office or a meeting room? The answer in today's world, in a lot of cases, well, we don't. And I today was on a DDR meeting with Network Rail and 38 attendees on that meeting. So his question is, how does the industry respond to this change in how we work? In other words, working from home will become the norm. How will the rail industry respond to that?
Yeah. So I think, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to work at home on a Monday and a Friday, and I'm going to go into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's what I'm going to do. And so when I need to collaborate and meet new people and, you know, talk at seminars and stuff like that, you know, I'll arrange my week around that. Other tasks I can do easily from home. So there's a couple of things here. Firstly, the fact that we used to have a very busy network, but for only 2 hours a day is not an efficient use of your resources. You know, rail infrastructure is very expensive. Trains are very expensive. Train crew. And so, you know, if you look at the size of Edinburgh Waverly, the size of your rolling stock fleet, the size of your train crew establishments, they were all designed around the peak of the peak. So actually, if the peak of the peak never comes back, we do actually have an opportunity to create a more efficient railway, which doesn't consume vast sums of public money, and hopefully get a smoother demand profile during the day. There's no doubt in my mind that in order to regain passengers, we're going to have to cut fares. There's no question of that. We have to provide a price incentive. Of course, people are saving a lot of money on season tickets by not commuting, so they're going to require a nudge to start travelling again. And when they do start travelling again, they're not going to buy a season ticket, are they? So obviously ScotRail already offers FlexiPass on the smart card, which is great. We've recently agreed with Transport Scotland that we're going to be able to launch some new exciting ticketing types next year, which will make it even easier to buy from us than it is already. And the industry is looking at things like 3-day-a-week seasons. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, if there's no peak, why are we charging peak fares? There isn't one. So should we start to think about that? And it was interesting, Avanti West Coast, Friday's not a peak day for them now. They've designated it an off-peak day in recognition that the old fare structures are not appropriate for the new world. And you might argue that the old timetable isn't appropriate for the new world either. So at the moment we're operating 80% of services. You know, why would we put the other 20% back if they're not needed? Surely we would add services as they're needed. And no one really knows how demand is going to recover. But what we do know is demand is going to be a lot lower for a long period of time. And when it does come back, it will come back differently from the way it was before. So, you know, the mix between commuter, business and leisure will be different. And we're going to have to change our timetable and our products and our prices accordingly.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and your ability to be agile in that response is going to be key to how the industry recovers. A question from Trish Fort about that, the change of use maybe. She says, during lockdown, many people have discovered the joy of cycling. Will Scotland be able to improve capacity for bikes on the West Highland Line and Far North lines and improve the use of HSTs for bikes so that people can put their bike on and trains at all stations? Scotland's tourism industry in many places for more people touring on bikes, and she sees that as a green shoot of recovery. Is that something that you're considering?
Yeah, so obviously this £475 million investment in new and upgraded trains has created a which is better than it was a few years ago, and that's brilliant for everybody. Whether you've got a pushchair, a wheelie bag, you know, you're shopping or whatever, or you just want a seat, it's good for everybody. So there's more space for everybody. That's a good thing, particularly with lower volumes. There's definitely more space for everybody. We have been, during lockdown, converting a carriage, 5 carriages in fact, from our Class 153 fleet to be active travel carriages. And on the West Highland Line next year, there'll be, you know, a ScotRail train which normally operates on the West Highland Line, and on the back of it will be a dedicated active travel carriage which will take lots and lots of bikes and mountaineering equipment, etc., to really tap into that market. HSTs are an issue. We need to improve cycle provision on HSTs. It's not straightforward or cheap, but we need to do it. So we just need to bite that bullet at some point. We're currently doing a sort of connectivity study into all the stations across Scotland. Obviously, Scotland is well served by lots of free car parks, and that's probably not great for the environment, is it? But car will go electric, so that's not the environment. We're still going to have the problem with the fact that they're all full by 7:30 in the morning, and so a lot of our off-peak trains, the mode that people want to change with is the car. Park the car, so they probably just stay in it and drive. And so we're doing this study about what the right answer for that is. You know, maybe we should make our car parks free for electric cars. But the other thing I think we need to do is really exploit electric bikes. So bikes essentially expand the walking catchment of a station, and then electric bikes increase the catchment of a station still further. I think electric bikes will end up being the next big thing, And so we're talking about very quickly developing an electric bike strategy, because that could be a game-changing trend. And in fact, on the active travel carriage, there is a charging point for electric bike. So again, we're in the foothills of working out, you know, how big a trend is electric bikes going to be, and do we as a railway need to respond to that to tap into new markets? I think we do.
Thank you. That's an excellent response, and I think it shows that the thinking about how the recovery will happen and how changes in post travel needs will in the future. You're already trying to assess that, and at least in the response for it happens.
So, you know, just to give you an example, it's all, you know, PR fluff from the MD. If you look at the latest station that we've opened in Kintore, on the outskirts, it takes you over an hour in the bus, but 19 minutes on the train. We've got oodles of electric vehicle charging points. In fact, Kintore station is the largest electric vehicle charging point in the whole of Scotland, in the whole of northeast Scotland, sorry, in the whole of northeast of Scotland. We've got bus facilities there. We've improved walking and cycling, so it made it easier to get the station via any mode, but in particular by any green mode. And I think, you know, when we do East Linton and Reston and Levermouth, you'll see more and more of that built into the bricks of our projects going forward.
Okay, and maybe slightly connected with that, Chris Haggerty asks, if you have this aggressive decarbonisation plan in place, what can Scottish Railways do better with supply chain? Are 5-year frameworks long enough from a duration perspective? And surely a 10-year with break clauses will only benefit the customers in the long run and enable your supply chain to adopt a greater inward investment strategy, part with a decarbonisation angle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So I believe that our key suppliers should be involved in the running of the business. So, for example, you know, why did we get brilliant performance out of Hitachi? It's because we spent a lot of time with Hitachi, making them part of our team and understanding our business and making sure how important it was that they delivered, and they did. And on the Network Rail side, you know, one of the senior people from the signalling framework at Siemens is now part of the capital delivery leadership team here in Network Rail, which has raised some eyebrows. You know, how on earth, why you've got a supplier sat round the table? And it's like, yeah, they're our framework supplier, it's important. I meet with the supply chain regularly, and I always say to them, this is Scotland, this is what we're up to, how can you help? And let's go and speak to Scottish Government together. And Scottish Government are interested in, you know, the railway, in decarbonising it. Railways are expensive. Let's make that money work twice by making sure we are employing, you know, people who live in Scotland and helping Scotland PLC to maximise the economic value of what we're doing. And those are the sort of conversations we had. So I'll give you an example. When we electrified Shotts and Stirling, Dunblane, Alloa, we were using an Italian wiring train, and all the crew were Italian. I've got nothing against the Italians, but if we're going to do a 15-year rolling programme of electrification, shouldn't it be a team based here in Scotland with Scottish people? So we get the money to work twice, because those people are also spending the money in the shops and buying houses and whatnot. So improving the economic return of anything we spend on a railway is definitely on the radar. And I spend quite a lot of time making sure that people who don't people who aren't based in Scotland understand Scotland, because it's different.
Thank you. A question about, I guess, communications from Dave Gordon. And he says, I'm sure like me, there are many people on the call here who are passionate about our railway. What avenues or forums are there to communicate ideas on efficiency to help keep our railway competitive? In other words, if someone had an idea about that, I think this would be a good idea to keep railways efficient and competitive, where would they go with that? Is there a forum for that?
Mm. Well, not formally. Maybe they should be. But I mean, I think the professional institutions and events like this are really important. You know, we need to network well and network often so we can, you know, swap ideas. And I guess one thing I would encourage people to do is, you know, you might be a load of permanent way people. Well, you know, go to some of the other institution events and let's try and get that cross-fertilization. You know, that works in reverse as well. You know, I encourage my team and I to do events like this, to start conversations with people. And, you know, if you've got a bright idea, you know, drop me an email, tweet me. You know, there's lots of things we're good at that we know, but there's lots of things that we're not good at and we don't know. And if you've got bright ideas, then please contact me or anybody in Scotland's Railway with a bright idea. The other thing that we are contemplating is whether we sort of create some sort of academy for Scotland's Railway. It might be a virtual academy, but if we're going to create the rail business managers of the future, if we're going to get track and train to work more closely and more closely with its supply chain, how do we give people the skills? How do we move people round ScotRail, round Network Rail, round Scottish Government, round supply chain? So we get this strategic view of Scotland's Railway from lots of different perspectives. Personally, I'm pretty accessible. You know, email me.
Thanks for that. A question for me, and then I'll take one more from the audience, and then we'll close the discussion down. Alex, you mentioned Blackford Container Transfer Facility that Highland Spring are about to go into the final stages of construction with. I've been involved in that right from its outset, 2016. It's taken a while to get to where it is, lots of reasons for that. But it was heartening, I think, in that project to understand that Transport Scotland were enabling things to happen. And that Highland Spring, not being a railway operator at all, were helped in their simple idea, which was, hang on a minute, there's a rail connection very close to our factory. Why can't we remove those 76 lorries every train load off the roads and put everything on rail? My question is, will the strategy in the future continue to support free access to people that don't have it at the moment?
Yes, it will, and we will need to do that in order to hit our freight growth targets. And therefore, one of the things we need to do is to drive down the cost of creating these railway connections. So we delivered the Blackford connection, clearly we did it relatively cheaply. But sometimes Transport Scotland or a private operator or a freight operator will say, oh, can you build me a rail connection there? And Network Rail gives a price, and you know they think someone's added a naught on the end. And so this is what I say, you know, we've got to make sure we are an efficient and competitive railway. That means, you know, responding quickly, giving people sensible prices to earn a living. if we don't, people won't choose the railway. So we've got to change our behaviour in order to survive.
The thing I liked about Highland Springs' proposal was, right from the outset, they said build a siding or a facility capable of handling X today and 2X tomorrow. They always had an eye in the future and said up to 1 to 5 years we'll be doing this amount of business, and then in 5 years' time we're looking at double that. So there was always a capacity increase plan for the future, and I think that was encouraged by Transport Scotland.
Absolutely. Transport Scotland are very carefree. I mean, I think, in train operating company land, franchise terms, railway thinking control period terms, but the world doesn't think like that. Highland Springs think this is our business, it's our business forever, and we're going to make sure it thrives in probably the next 30 years. And that commitment made a huge decision for them. They don't have the taxpayer stood behind us like we do, and therefore we need to remember that if we're going to serve those companies well, we need to behave in a certain way.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any more questions, so I'm just going to move swiftly back to my agenda and say done with the questions and comments, and I'll ask Jim Watson to propose the vote of thanks for members.
Thank you, Tom.
Jim.
Alex, thank you for giving up your time tonight to provide a strategic overview of Scotland's railway in these unprecedented times. Firstly, you rightly referred to Stonehaven and the need to work to reduce the consequences of infrastructure failure. Such an incident puts everything we do into perspective. The pandemic has brought you new challenges. From new competition in the post-pandemic world, the world has indeed moved on, and as you say, the industry must grasp the opportunities in a joined-up way. Increase in freight is a welcome trend, given the collapse of coal in Scotland. The Highland Springs statistic of 76 HGVs off the road by one train is particularly impressive. Turning to infrastructure, it is actually refreshing to hear recognition that Egypt, amongst other projects, did not go well, but of course lessons have been learned, and that you are working hard to deliver more smartly in the future, driving down costs and getting really good at it. Decarbonisation by 2035. Gosh, it's an ambitious target, but I'm sure with a will, it's doable. The client, considering that rail is expensive, is perhaps nothing new, but a realisation that we have to be efficient and we need to be competitive is refreshing to hear. When the time is right, yeah, we will win back customers if the price is right. You've kept the railway running reliably, and that's something that we need to be shouting from the rooftops. It's a good news story, and good news stories are always welcome. One reason I've given up on buying the Scotsman. Anyway, thank you, Alec, once again for coming along this evening, and also thanks to our audience tonight, which has been from far and wide, including as far away as Falkirk and California, USA. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Just a quick reminder for me, up and coming section meetings. Our next one in the new year, Wednesday, 20th of January, will be digital signal sighting for Cardiff HST depot by Cellen Farrell of Arcadis. So we'll look forward to hearing you all virtually then. Thank you very much. And the network reception is courtesy of yourselves. Thank you. and good night.